And a hearty welcome to one and all. This is episode 64 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank all of you who are joining me for the YouTube version of the podcast. If you're enjoying it, haven't done so already, don't forget to click like, subscribe, turn on those notifications. Or if you're catching episode 54 in the audio format on Spotify, iTunes, or the rest of the platforms, same general rule applies. If you haven't done so already and are enjoying the content, click like, subscribe, turn on those notifications. So as somebody who has recently turned 50, I'm more aware of beginnings, endings, and new beginnings than ever before. Sort of concepts that most of the time you don't think of when you're a much younger person. And I was an introspective kid. You might say that my powers of introspection were as much a hindrance as a help, because I did spend an awful lot of time buried deep within my own thoughts. So I was not a kind of thoughtless, instinctive individual. I was somebody who did an awful lot of thinking and focusing and concentrating and trying to figure his way out of and sometimes into situations, usually unsuccessfully. I thought too much. But maybe not about the right things. For example, I was born into a very solid family. Even though my parents ended up splitting and I had a lot of issues as a kid, but I was born to people who cared, who loved me. And I feel like I wasn't cognizant enough of that. The fact that my father's parents were like second parents and spoiled me. I don't want to say spoiled me rotten. That would be the general way of describing it. I don't accept that. They spoiled me. They spoiled me with love and kindness and compassion, more so than just physical gifts. I didn't appreciate them enough. I didn't appreciate my father enough as a younger person, because the brain of a child, my perception was he doesn't really want to spend that much time with me. For example, on a Sunday, let's say during tax season, the old SCF, or back then it was Shulman Conan first. Dad was working 6 days a week. And I understood that. I said, well, he's doing his best to try to support the home. Even as a small boy, I understood that he wasn't just going out into the wilderness and trying to bring home a deer for dinner. He was out in the workaday world, picking him up at the train, driving him to the train, with mom, whatever, or days he took his car. So I understood what he was doing. But still, when on Sundays, all he wanted to do was sleep, I should have just let the man sleep, rather than somehow taking it as an insult that he needed some rest. But these kinds of thoughts, we unfortunately usually don't have when we're that age. If we're lucky, we come to them sooner. And I did start to change my thinking, kind of reorient my thinking, but it took me longer. And the reality is it took me longer to do a lot of normal person things. But what I see now, what I understand now, and it is humbling and bracing, and it's sad to ponder, but it's life. And I feel like if younger people are more willing to think of these things and have these almost kind of interior conversations, they'll be better for them. There was a point in time where my father and I played ball for the last time, that we went bowling together for the last time. We didn't really go bowling that much, even growing up in a bowling alley. He wasn't that big of a bowler. By the time he got into his 30s, he kept hurting his back. So he had to be careful. He didn't bowl that much. But I don't have specific memories of a lot of different moments, because I wasn't thinking that, well, we're never going to do this again. At a certain point in my life, I was never a college student again. After May 19th, 1997, New York University graduation at Washington Square Park, Commencement speaker, Bill Cosby. How come you all stopped cheering? Top 10 great moments ever, even though it was Cosby. When we quieted down as he got to the lectern up there in the middle of the park, and the place was just going fucking crazy, screaming, cheering. There might have been a couple of people throwing tomatoes at him. I mean, he was not unpopular in 1997. But we quieted down and he said, how come you all stopped cheering? Epic. But after that day, I was never to be a college student again. That was a section, a part of my life, which was over. And when you reach, if you're fortunate enough to reach the age of 50, and you're as lucky as I am, I have to, even me, I have to remind myself not to get so aggravated over the small stuff, because there are a lot of things that I got to experience that many people won't, that I continue to get to experience that many people won't. And I need to be mindful. You know, mindfulness, that's a concept when I was a kid I would have just tossed out the window. I said, that's just new age crap. And I mean, when I was 13 or 14, when people would say, Jerry, you need to take a step back. Fuck you. What the hell are you talking about? I was that. More id dominant than super ego, at least in theory. I do remember the last Yankees game that my father and I went to. And what should have been a great memory is unfortunately colored by a health issue, which ended up, unfortunately, becoming a major health issue. And I hope that I don't offend anybody or put people off. This is not controversial, but it's real life stuff. So my father was a diehard Yankee fan. He grew up in a household where his father, Grandpa Nat, the guy who owned the bowling alley and nightclub in Woodmere, New York, that's still there, he grew up a Yankee fan, and from as far back as he could remember, 1951, Joe DiMaggio's last year, Mickey Mantle's first, my father was 8 and 9 during that baseball season. He watched as much of every Yankees game as he could from that time in his life forward. Now, when you're in the workaday world, at a time where there's no internet, you can't live stream it while you're doing the Strauss Trust taxes, he would listen to games on the radio if he was stuck in the office. He was sometimes try to catch it on the radio at home, or if somebody had a radio while he was on the train, or listen in the car. So that's one advantage. If you're able to, it's almost absurd, drive to work in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, 90s, before everything was Wi-Fi. At least you could listen to a Yankee game if you were at the office late, if you had a long ride, and Dad, a client in Mount Vernon, if he got stuck in traffic, he might get to listen to 6-7 innings of the Yankee game on the way home. These were the things that he loved. He loved his Yankees. So throughout my life, my dad and I shared this love of the New York Yankees. And I can't tell you, because I would be guessing, how many games we watched together, not just when we lived under the same roof, but later, even as my life changed and I was able to move out. Again, things get lucky, got married, got divorced, all of these things. But we still watched Yankee games together. And the last game we went to together, I got tickets, not that it matters that they were good seats. They weren't like Legend Suite or Champion Suite seats. We got good seats. We were near the Jim Beam section, if you're familiar with Yankee Stadium, and it's kind of in the middle as far as height, and we were very close to kind of the overhang. So great view of the field, right behind home plate. We had a long ride. And I should point out, at this particular juncture, my father was turning 79. He was turning 79. He had slowed down. He hadn't, worked in close to a decade, but he had slowed down, and there were certain things that he was now a little slower on the uptake than he had been, within the previous few years. This is neither here nor there, but at a certain point, circa 2017, the light began to dim in his eyes. It didn't mean that he couldn't do anything, but it meant that he was not as capable as he had been up until that point in his life. His father, Grandpa Nat, at 96, was still living alone, still driving, still dating younger women. I mean, women in their 70s and 80s. I'm not talking, he wasn't Howard Marshall. Was it J. Howard Marshall? The guy who was, 81 when he hooked up with 23-year-old Anna Nicole Smith. He wasn't doing that. But Grandpa outlasted, I don't even want to say how many lady friends after my grandmother unfortunately passed about 3 decades ago. But not everybody gets to do that. Grandpa Nat was still paying his bills on time by check every month. Never missed a payment. Was still doing the crossword a week before he passed at 96. God bless him, right? My father started struggling a little bit. He was still driving. He was still on top of most things, but I knew that he was slipping, and it hurt. It hurt because this was a guy who was, for all of his awkwardness, and obviously he was on the autism spectrum. I didn't become neurodivergent in a vacuum, right? Wink, wink. But there were things that it was starting to take him longer to send out checks and do stuff which was really simple for him. There was stuff that he was still better than me doing when it came to making phone calls to financial institutions and keeping track of investments. It's not that he couldn't do it, but things that were once nursery school level, now they were more like 6th grade level. He had to actually take a few extra ticks to get it done. So we went to a Yankee game for his 79th birthday. It wasn't literally August 31st. That was his birthday. We went to a game. It was like September 1st or September 2nd. Now, unbeknownst to me, he had begun having a physical problem. I didn't know that there was any physical issue. Yeah, he had a back problem. He had hip issues. My father used to be 6'1 plus, and by this point in time, he was about 5'8.5. But this was something else. We were going to drive to the game, and for whatever reason, we hit a shit ton of traffic. And we were stuck in traffic for so long that even though we both used the restroom before, at his house, I was living in Huntington Village. His house was in Huntington. We both went to the bathroom before we left, but it was such a long, and we left at like 4 o'clock, and 2+ hours later, we're still screwing around trying to get to the stadium. It was a fucking horror show. He felt like his bladder was exploding. Now, I wasn't feeling great, but he felt like it was really bad, and that he was just willing to get out of the car on a street corner, even though there were cops all over the place. Now, when I tell you, my father, for him to even think that, let alone say it to me, there's no one in the car but us. He was in agony. I can't even imagine how much agony for him, for someone like him, the most private person. You try to imagine the most private person, quick to get embarrassed, and then put that guy on speedball. That's my father. That is how nervous he was about how he was perceived by others. We ended up, traffic let up. We got to the stadium. We both, as much as we could race inside, we got decent parking, not far from the ballpark. We went in, and yeah, I had to go, but I had to go within normal parameters. So I peed, and he had said, I'll meet you back at the seat. I might want to get a pretzel, whatever it was. So I walked back to our seats. He had his ticket, and a couple of minutes go by, 5 minutes go by, 10 minutes go by, and he's not back. I hate to be an alarmist. Dad's life was not in danger that day, but I got scared. I thought that he had gone. Maybe he collapsed in the bathroom. I don't know. I thought something terrible had happened. So I was very, very shaky and nervous getting up out of my seat and walking over to the bathroom. And didn't see anything strange. There were no paramedics. So just in terms of the visuals of making my way to the bathroom, I said, okay, nothing's happened. What the hell is going on? And then I'd get stupid. Maybe he had to take a crap. You start calculating. Maybe he got sick to his stomach and he doesn't know if he's going to throw up. I don't know. But he was in a stall. He was trying to pee. And he was in that stall trying to pee for close to a half hour. I did not know that that was a physical problem that he was dealing with as he got older. And it's something that, again, you reach the age of 50 and you talk to doctors and it's embarrassing, but they say you reach a point where you could be in trouble if you ever get to a bladder bursting stage of a day where you can't get to a bathroom. Because if you can go, then generally speaking, you're fine. The issue is if there's too much, then you have this. So he was in there. He missed the whole first inning trying to empty, and he could not. He was unable. So we watched the game, and he said, well, I got most of it out, whatever. I don't want to gross you up, but understand. This is real life stuff. And it was me dealing with this in person for the first time with my dad. Who, again, I've always held, even if we had our ups and downs, I owe him everything. I mean, I owe his father a lot, but my worldview was shaped by them, but more so by him and how I approach a lot of different things. I am my father's son. He was enjoying the game more than me. I kept thinking about this. Why didn't we leave earlier? Why didn't we stop along the way? So I'm angry with myself. I'm not enjoying what turns out to be the last Yankees game of so many, going back to 1976 when I was 2, the first year of the old ballpark. Mom and Dad took me to the second game ever at what at the time was called New Yankee Stadium, but it was basically the house that Ruth built with fresh coat of paint and about $50 million in renovations. Kind of like they retrofitted the old park. But I was going to games with my dad since 1976. So from 1976 until like September 2nd or whatever it was, September 1st of 2021. It's 45 years. So the Yanks end up winning the game. It was an exciting game. And 2021, even though they flamed out in the playoffs, as they often do, it was an exciting season. And it was a great game. It went to extra innings. The Yankees were actually down in extras. It looked like they were going to lose. They rallied. Stanton, Giancarlo got a big hit. We went home. And Dad kept thanking me for the night. I'm sorry I put a damper on it with the medical thing. But we took him home. And then I went home. And he called me at about 1 a.m., just as I was getting to sleep. And the sound in his voice, it wasn't fear. It was disappointment and sadness. He said, Jared, I hate to do this to you. You're probably sleeping, but I need you to take me to the hospital. I can't empty. I can't empty. They're going to have to put a catheter in. And I didn't know that he had an experience with this before, that it had happened once before. He was very quiet. He didn't like to talk about it. Nobody likes to talk about stuff like this. I get that, but I didn't know. And so, fortunately, I lived in Huntington Village. I dropped him to the hospital. I picked him up the following morning, when the doctors were able to say, okay, he should be okay. And he was okay for about another 6 weeks. He was still living his basic life, did not have another issue with needing a catheter, because he told me there's conversations you have which don't click. And there was one time where he explained to me that on his way to visit his lady friend who lived not far from Rutgers, that's in Jersey. At a certain point, he had started just stopping at one of the rest areas, whether or not he had to go. And it didn't click in my brain that he was in his own way telling me that it was an issue. If I had asked a question, he probably would have said, yeah, I just, I don't want to take any chances on backup. About 6 weeks after this really kind of negative, unfortunate experience, he was in a car accident from which he did not recover. And he passed just before what would have been his 80th birthday in 2022. I didn't know that this was going to be the last Yankee game we would go to. I knew it 6 weeks later, 8 weeks later. The night was memorable for all the wrong reasons. And it's unfortunate, but that's another reality of life. You can plan for stuff. You can be nice and do nice things for other people, but sometimes it's not going to go the way that you want. Hey, roll with the punches, right? You're still here. That was an unfortunate ending. But the way I look at it is I'm here now, and I am fortunate to be here. I would not be here without him. And that's like, to me, the biggest ending, that we shared so much as far as movies. I think the last movie that we watched together on streaming was Chariots of Fire. Was also in Dad's all-time top 5. I know I'm not the only one. And my Aunt Marcia, my dad's sister, it would certainly be in her top 10. So that's the last movie that we sat and watched together on a couch, even though we'd both seen it at least 24 times. It's one of those movies that he could always sit down and watch. He just loved it so much, as I did and as my aunt did. My sister also. Mom, I'm not so sure about. But I know a lot of people say, Jared, fucking snooze fest, bro. What are you going to do? In terms of other beginnings and endings, I do remember the last time I saw his father, my grandfather. And in that instance, unfortunately, we all knew he was going to die. He was terminal. He had pancreatic cancer and went down to Florida. I thought that, I didn't know when I was leaving that I was going down to say goodbye, but I was going down to say goodbye. And when I got home, he was gone within a couple of days. But that's the kind of circle of life, because my dad's health was good for more than a decade later. He was still working at least an 80% schedule when he had to say goodbye to his dad and my grandfather. That's the way that it goes. It's like this, right? And somebody else. You say goodbye to a lot of people in life, and at a certain point, people are going to say goodbye to you, right? Most other beginnings and endings are not really that important. They're important symbolically, but in terms of the impact on our daily lives, not as important. I don't remember the last time that my dad and I got into an argument when he was really, himself. I used to do stuff for him the last time I ever went shopping for him. Now, he could still shop before his car accident, but sometimes he would just ask me to, hey, I forgot to get the milk. Can you just pick me up? And he liked the soy milk, so I would get him soy milk. Stuff like that. It is, again, not necessarily unfortunate that in the last few years of his life, starting with COVID, where he really came through like a champ. He started an exercise routine during COVID. He was always kind of a slender guy. And the cardio machine I have in the basement here was in his living room. I got that, or I didn't get that for him. I got that for myself, and then I got another one, and I brought that one to him. So a beginning was that my 77-year-old father started exercising on the daily when COVID hit. And he didn't know what to do with himself. Although as a CPA, retired CPA, he was used to being alone all the time. He was used to, hey, life is now all about tunnel vision, buddy. That was a beginning. And it was something that he kept up until his car accident. That was an ending. But all of this just makes me more mindful and more appreciative and more aware to take stock in things, to take note in experiences. And for example, when we thought the first time that Dad was going to pass in the kind of early summer of 2022, because he'd been in a rehab facility, he was in the hospital, it was all bad. And we kept preparing for the end. And then my sister, who was living in San Diego, came back to New York, and we reconnected. We spent so much time with each other. It was really the only really good thing that happened in the year of 2022, which was the year where we realized at the beginning of the year, he's never going to recover. He might end up, unfortunately, like his mom, my grandmother, the last 7 years of her life after a stroke, horrendous. It was so bad. Not in pain, but couldn't really do anything for herself anymore. And for somebody who was such a control freak, who was so certain of so much in his life to have to ask questions like, I don't know what kind of shoes. Do you think it's okay if I wear slippers? And then changing shoes again and again and again. It was very, very painful. But having my sister around to say goodbye, if you will, and my mother flying in from Florida, despite their own ending of marriage, she mourned as deeply as anyone for the loss of the father of her children, my sister and I, and for the fact that despite all of their issues, he had told her that he would do it all over again if he could have, exactly the way that it went down. He didn't regret it, and neither did she. You might regret actions. Hey, we all regret actions, but didn't regret the end result. It's funny, I don't remember Dad really being sad or fearful at the very end. Grandpa Nat was. Because Grandpa Nat still had the entirety of his formidable intellectual capacity right up until within a couple of days. That was devastating. That's something that I won't forget. And that is also something that humbles me whenever I think of it. That I was in a room with my grandfather when he was making phone calls, literally saying goodbye to people. It was painful. I didn't want to be there, but I knew that it was something that I needed to hear and see, as rough as it was. And unfortunately, a lot of life, this is again something I didn't get when I was younger. Because when you're a kid, number one, you think you're going to live forever. You're not imagining that you have a finite time here. And that the people you love and who care for you, hell, even the people you hate and who hate you, you're not thinking in those terms. Yeah, I was a little kid and I wondered, am I going to wake up tomorrow? Am I going to die? But in a broader sense, as they said on the old Star Trek, how we deal with death is just as important as how we deal with life. And it's something that I have come to know more and more as I've aged. The pain of my grandfather at 96, who got about as much out of life as anybody. I mean, his whole life is a success story. I talked about it. I won't go into the details. So much success from zero. Hard work, common sense, a lot of intelligence, and a pretty sharp sense of humor in his way. He wasn't ready to say goodbye. That's what gutted me. Because I guess I imagined that you make it that far, you do that much, you have that many people who look up to you, who respect you. Doesn't that count for something? Well, yeah, it counts for something. He was still sad and he was hurt that he was leaving this world that he loved so much and the people whom he loved so much. I guess I'm grateful that my dad didn't have that at the end. Maybe he wasn't capable of it at the end. But when he found out he was terminal, his first thoughts were his kids. How are Jessica and Jeremy going to take this? He was worried for us. At the end, he wasn't, woe is me. He didn't even seem scared. He was worried about us. So when I think of beginnings of Yankee fandom for him in 1951, beginnings of Yankee fandom for me when I didn't even have any clue, 1976, and endings of his Yankee fandom. He got to see Aaron Judge hit the 42nd home run that Judge hit in 2022. That was the last Yankee game that he caught. But you think of beginnings and you think of endings. And if I'm going to impart any kind of, I hate to say wisdom, this is just all philosophical. I don't know that I would say wisdom. But to be more mindful, 100%, as much as possible. Take stock, who you are, where you are, who you're with. Try to turn good memories into core memories, things that you can always, look back on. Don't take anything or anyone in your life for granted. I'll tell you, my father, he laughed a lot. Even when his health went downhill, he still laughed. He still looked forward to good meals and time with family. That's something that we carry with us. The good of those who are gone. And the kind of, you wouldn't think somebody who, in this instance, I was 48 at the time when Dad passed, that I would still be hung up on the idea that he's gone. He's not walking back through that door. I know it's so obvious, but until you experience it, because for example, with his father, with Grandpa Nat, I often went huge chunks out of the year not seeing him. A little bit of out of sight, out of mind. But the immediacy, the shock, the mourning process, it wasn't easy. But you just think, you mourn the end of a life, not the end of a legacy. As I say, I sit here right now, in part, large part, because of the life that my dad led. And I don't ever take that for granted. I don't ever brush that to the side. And I treasure the memories. I'm sad that he's not still here as he was, that he was not able to have the retirement of his dad. Grandpa Nat literally had a 30-year retirement where he was in bristling good health almost the whole way. But everybody's path is different. And who knows where my path will take me? I don't know. But I will be forever mindful and grateful and be more conscious of when something could be the final time. That's it. Be more aware of yourself, of your surroundings. And the Captain Obvious conclusion is, tell the people you love that you love them as much as you possibly can. Don't take anyone in your circle for granted. Reach out. Send that risky text. Make that risky phone call. Don't drunk dial. I'm not giving you free rein to do that. But send that text to a person you haven't spoken to in a long time, but who you miss. Or to that potential romantic partner that you're not really sure how they feel. Take a shot. Take a risk. Be polite. As Dennis Hopper famously in Blue Velvet, be polite. Be polite. But don't let your fears overcome you. And don't let your fears keep you from forming those core memories and an understanding that beginnings and endings and new and different beginnings are part of the circle of life. And it took me, I guess, till 50 to put all of this together. I apologize to those that tried to instill these concepts in me as a younger person where they were just in one ear out the other. But you know what? Better later than never. And with that, we've reached the end of episode 64 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for coming on this journey with me back through time, and appreciation and a little bit of an understanding of my dad, and to a lesser extent his dad, and some of the lessons that I learned from them, and how I've grown more appreciative as I've gotten older of the life that I've been able to live and lead. If you've checked out episode 64, the YouTube version, haven't done so already, don't forget to click like, subscribe, turn on those notifications. Or if you're catching up with 64 in the audio formats on Spotify, iTunes, Amazon Music, or iHeartRadio, if you're enjoying the content, even some of the heavy stuff I get into this time, Don't forget to click like, subscribe, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with presumably a much lighter episode 65 real soon. Take care. Thanks for watching, and thanks.